to anatomy and physiology, body regions and terms. Welcome to the introduction portion. This is going to be just a short statement about the use of textbooks. Every reading assignment has chapters that is required for the student to read prior to taking their exams and their assignments. But it's important to understand to use the textbook to its whole possibilities. And many students, they neglect to go to the back of the book. And I cannot stress or under stress the importance of using the index and a glossary in a textbook. It can assist you in saving you time. They have definitions of words. They have an index that tells you where to find the material and what page number to go to. So when you're struggling to find the information, you go to probably the first thing you want to do is go to the internet. Well, the internet's not reliable. Your textbook is. In your textbook, you can find the material, usually in the index or the glossary, and direct you to the page number you need to go to. Then you can properly find it and answer that hard question on that assignment. And I just highly recommend using the complete book. So with that being said, let's continue the course. There are three types of anatomy. Gross anatomy is subdivided to surface anatomy, the external body, regional anatomy, specific regions of that body, and systematic anatomy with specific organ systems. Then you have microscopic anatomy, subdivided into cytology, the study of cells, and histology, the study of tissues. Then you have anatomy is closely related to physiology, the study of function, biochemistry, chemical processes, and living things. Comparative anatomy, similarities and differences between species, and embryology. Knowledge of anatomy is needed to understand the human biology and the medicine. Physiology is the structures and functions sustaining life and shape responses to the environment. The multicellular bodies of animals consist of tissues that make up more complex organs and organ systems. Humans rely on homeostasis to keep their core temperature hovering around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit so that our bodies can maintain proper function. Homeostasis is the ability to maintain a relatively stable and internal state to persist despite changes in the world outside. Study of anatomy. The gross anatomy, microscopic anatomy, developmental anatomy, comparative, and systematic. The gross anatomy is accredited to the Greek Aristotle, a philosopher lived many years ago. He advanced the concept that every organ has a specific function, and that function is based in the organ structure. In the 3rd century, schools of human anatomy encouraged human dissection. Previously, only plants and animals had been dissected. And then in the Middle Ages, you had the first medical schools. But they didn't really further medicine that much. I mean, you've heard about using leeches to cure various diseases during the 16th century. You can imagine bloodletting was one of their cures for many illnesses and caused many persons, or many individuals, demise because of that. Then you have the invention of the microscope. Led to significant advances in anatomical research. As you can see, that has a lot to do with microscopic anatomy. And advances in the 21st century have led to the mapping of the human genome, which is expected to lead to new discoveries about the human diseases. And they currently are achieving quite a lot of new material on genetic mechanisms that could be used to fight diseases or prevent them. Recent scientific studies have paved the way for a better understanding of the human diseases and treatments for those diseases, which has increased the human lifespan and quality of life. People's lifestyle and environment factors are being studied as a potential disease-causing agent. So you have populations in many locations in the earth that live far longer than others, And one of them, there's a group of individuals in Japan that is not extraordinary to live beyond 120 years of age. And we're talking being able to read, walk, talk, and work all the way up to that age group. So these studies are very important to the human lifespan. As you can see, I have brought my lab assistant to assist me on anterior, cephalic, and superior, inferior, and posterior and dorsal positions. As you can see, this nice little puppy. It has a cephalic, which is the head. It has a paw, which is distal from the proximal shoulder. It has an anterior, a posterior, and it has a distal end, the tail. Okay, so that pretty much gives you an idea. The illustrations that you're seeing here on the page are pretty self-explanatory, and that will help you understand it even better, the anatomical positions that have to be described when discussing medicine. Proximal, distal, and medial are very common terms used in locating injuries or wounds or pertinent areas of the body of concern. The proximal is the attachment to the dorso, the main part of the body. The distal is the furthest from that, and the medial is center line. And it's pretty much as the illustration indicates. And we use this quite often in understanding where our organs and injuries are. You see the first one was medial and lateral. Um, Medial, once again, is the center line, the center of the head, straight on through, down the middle of the chest, as if you separated right down the center of the torso. And the lateral is a movement away from the center line. So if I was to move something towards the midline, I'd be moving my arm towards the center of my body. If I was moving it away or to a lateral position, I'd be moving my arm further away from the center of the body. Then you have proximal and distal. Distal is usually the good indication of your hand. Your hand is distal. Distal is further away from the actual attachment of my arm to my torso, which means proximal. So it's a good way of indicating that the injury was distal to the elbow, which is further down from the elbow, and that would help us locate where the injury occurred. Then you have a superficial, which is the top, the surface area. And then you have deep internal, which is inside and under the tissue. And it can be several layers deep. And it could be a very serious injury. So I hope that helps you understand the medial, lateral, proximal, distal, and superficial, external, and deep internal. Now we're going to talk about the planes of the body. And once again, this is so that we can talk to our fellow workers and co-workers and our patients about areas of concern on the body. There are three basic reference planes used in anatomy: the sagittal plane, the coordinal plane, and the transverse plane. Now there's also the mid-sagittal, which is the median plane, is in the middle line through the center of the body. And all other sagittal planes are parallel to that. A human in an anatomical position, as you see on this illustration, can be described using a coordinated system with a z-axis from the front to the back, and an x-axis going from left to right. The y-axis going from up to down. As you can see that you have transverse plane, the cephalic, the caudal, and the mid-sagittal plane. You have a posterior dorsal and an anterior ventricle. This also would help you to use those terminologies, so now you can understand that when I say your ventricle, I'm looking at the front of your body. So that's important to understand, that the different terminologies can be used as we describe the body. In this illustration, you have a dorsal and ventral cavity. As you can see, it's well illustrated. But you need to understand that in primitive animals, vertebrates have spaces or body cavities that contain the body organs. Most vertebrates have a single body cavity, But in mammals, which we are, the diaphragm divides the main cavity into a thoracic and an abdominal cavity. Inside the thoracic cavity, there's a heart and lungs, and they are surrounded by their own membranes. So they have their own little cavities. The pericardial cavity around the heart, and around the lungs you have the pleural cavity. Humans have multiple body cavities, including the cranial cavity, the vertebral cavity, the thoracic cavity containing the pericardial cavity and the pleural cavity, which I stated earlier. And then you have the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. Here, this illustration has the regions, and it starts with the right hypochondriac region. As you'll notice, it is to the patient's right, not our right. All items concerning anatomical placement is always to the patient's right or left. In the right hypochondriac region, you will find portions of the liver, the gallbladder, the right kidney, and parts of the small intestine. Then on the opposite side, you have the left hypochondria. It contains part of the spleen, the left kidney, part of the stomach, the pancreas, and parts of the colon. In the center region is the epigastric, which means above the stomach. It contains a majority of the stomach, and part of the liver, part of the pancreas, part of the duodenum, part of the spleen, and the adrenal glands. This region pushes out, the diaphragm contracts during breathing. Then you have the right lumbar region, which contains the gallbladder, the right kidney, part of the liver, and the ascending colon. Opposite of that side is the left lumbar. It consists of descending colon, the left kidney, and part of the spleen. Then there's the umbilical. The umbilical region contains the umbilicus, which is the navel, and many parts of the small intestine, such as part of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. It also contains the transverse colon and the bottom portions of both the left and right kidneys. The right iliac region contains the appendix, the sacrum, and the right iliac fossa. It is also commonly referred to as the right inguinal region. Pain in this area is generally associated with the appendicitis. Then there's the left iliac region that contains part of the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the left iliac fossa. It is also commonly called the left inguinal region. Then in the middle you have the hypogastric. The hypogastric region means below the stomach and contains the organs around the pelvic bone or the pubic bone. These include bladder and part of the sigmoid colon, the anus, and many organs of the reproductive system, such as the uterus, ovaries in females, and the prostate in males. And as you can see, there are 9 regions, and we will go to the next slide. On this illustration, you'll see the anatomical parts and the supine position. The supine position was originally used in illustrations due to the fact of cadaver dissections. It has been used ever since then. As you can see, there's an anterior and posterior position. If you start with the superior or the anterior, which is the front of the body, you'll see it starts at the top of the head, and you have the cranium, which is a term that you could become familiar with the cavities. Then you have the common names that follow that. You have the oris, or the mouth, naso, which is the nose, and you have below that, you go further down on the thorax, your armpit, which is considered the axillary, the thoracic area, which is in the middle part, which I've used periodically in the slides. You have the brachium, which is the upper part of the arm. Then you have the anticubus, which is your elbow, and the antebrachium, which is the forearm. And then you have the capus, or the carpus, the wrist, or carpal. As you can see, it gives you several names for each one of these anatomical positions. You have the pollex, or the common thumb, and the palm, and then you have the digits, or phalanges. Then you have the patella, which is your knee, and you have the tarsus, which is the ankle, and the digitus, which are your toes, or the phalanges, the toes. Um, the reason why I wanted to introduce you to this is so that you would have an illustration available to you that you could use in your educational future. I would recommend capturing this in some way. It's a completely open free text illustration. It's just from a retired textbook, openstar.org. Um, so you shouldn't have any problems with the copyright issues on it. But it's a great little reference to have handy as you go through your career. As you can see, it has the posterior position. Um, there's the cephalon, or the head, or the cephalic. The cervical, which is your neck. The dorsum, the back. Uh, Once again, the brachium, the back, the arm, the brachial. Uh, Lumbus, the small part of the spine. The sacrum, which is the lower part of the back. You have the gluteus, the femur, the popliteus, the back of the knee. Um, it has the planta, which stands for the sole of your foot. So it could really be a very helpful item to have on hand. In your book, you have an illustration similar to this, but it's of the skeleton, and it's quite detailed as well. Uh, but the terminologies are not exactly the same because it's referring to the skeletal structure. So I hope that you'll find this useful, and so we'll go to the next slide. This concludes this portion of the lesson. There are numerous resources available to you. Within Blackboard, there's the Student Resources prompt that you can research and see that the numerous resources that your primary instructor has made available to you. There's Cengage, which has the entire book. It also has a search prompt available in that you can search the entire lesson plan. Then within Blackboard, there's the faculty availability. It's a prompt where instructors' information on how to contact the instructor is available. There's also to remember that during your discussion task, you can use these to buddy up with your fellow students and form study groups. UMA has an entire online library which can be used to further your understanding of the material. Best wishes until the next time we meet, and take care of yourselves.